My name is Quincy. I think you all know me now, but I'm the Director of Education and Innovation at Rocket. So thank you everyone for being here. And today I'm joined by someone who you might actually recognize his work because I'm sure some of your little ones are already singing his songs, anything to do with phonics. That's Kerry. So I'm really happy to have you here, Kerry. You're the co-founder of Anima Phonics, which is a Department of Education approved phonics program. It's used actually in many of the independent schools that we fit into, and of course we use it ourselves because it's just so fun, so playful, highly engaging, and actually. I think one of the things I love of your welcome letter to Anima Phonics is that you say that through all your years as a classroom teacher, all your expertise, you always notice that children make the best progress when they're engaged and motivated, and that's obviously at the heart of Anima Phonics. So yeah, it would be really nice to hear a little bit maybe about your own sort of like personal story, your own journey, what really inspired you to, move from teacher to all of a sudden creating your whole program that now is being used to so many schools and by so many children. And are there any moments from when you were in the classroom that really have shaped the philosophy and the ethos behind Anima Phonics?
Oh, correct. So yeah, I mean, if you haven't met me before, so I'm Kerry. I was a reception teacher. I think the year group that I spent most of my time in is reception. So I sort of know 4 to 5 year olds very well. I sort of think children as they start to get a little bit older, I think it's not quite the same feeling. I have taught in year 1, I've taught in year 2, I've taught in year 3. They don't laugh at your jokes in the same sort of way, right? And I think working in the early years, you go home from school and you just sort of feel like you've been a comedian all day long. And they find you funny. They enjoy everything you have to say, everything you have to teach them, they're interested in. And I mean, those of you who have older children here, you know how it does get a little bit harder as they get older. So yeah, my background is in reception. When I started teaching, so my first year, so back in 2008, I was given my own class in September, and I was told you have to teach these children how to read using phonics. I had never heard the word phonics, right? So in my teacher training, they never mentioned it. It didn't come up once. Okay, a whole year of teacher training, nothing. And then suddenly September, class sat in front of me, and I had to deliver phonics. So I had to get up to speed pretty quickly. And I guess the process for me was sort of realizing I wasn't really happy with what else was out there. So that sort of got the ball rolling for me. Maybe there is something I can try and design myself or make myself. And that's sort of the route that led us to Anima Phonics.
I love that. You found something that it wasn't there, and then you used it to create your own program. I love that, and I love that you actually not even yourself had that training to understand what phonics is. And to be honest, as parents, if you are not in education or it's your first child, actually the word phonics can be terrifying. So maybe we can talk in plain terms of what phonics is and what is not.
Yeah, well, phonics is not new. I think lots of parents think there's this new way of teaching kids to read. I didn't learn with that back when I was at school. But actually, phonics is about 3,000 years old, okay? So it was created by the Phoenicians. There's a clue in the name. So right at the far end of the Mediterranean. Somebody else there. Yeah, right around sort of where modern day Lebanon is, had the Phoenicians. And they developed a script for getting speech sounds down onto paper, or probably papyrus right back then. And it wasn't an entire alphabet, so it was mostly just consonants. So we call it an abjad when it contains just consonants. And actually, consonants are way more important than vowels. You can write most words, even if you take the vowels out of those words, you can still write them. Lots of cool, trendy band names just have their name in consonants and capital letters. You'll notice that now. But that's where phonics came from. It proved really easy to learn. You just needed to know about 20 symbols. That was it. And you can get anything you wanted down onto paper. The Phoenicians, they travelled all around the Mediterranean. They not only taking their spices, their oils, their fabrics, they took this new way of writing and reading. And so you could write in any language. That Phoenician script turned into Greek, into our modern Latin script that we use today. Exactly the same thing happened with Arabic as well. So if you read and write in Arabic, your letters have come from that set of 20 Phoenician symbols.
Wow.
So phonics is old, but then something went wrong. We got to the 1960s and the 1970s. And teachers back then, like in any other era, wanted to try something new, be progressive. And phonics was seen as the old-fashioned way of learning to read. So they introduced this new concept called whole language. You might also know it as sight word reading. So instead of breaking words down and sort of sounding like a robot, like children can, right? We just look at the word and we memorize it using our visual store, almost like a symbol, in the same way that you might see and memorize symbols on the road when you're driving around. You would look at a word. This is the word dog. This is the word table. This is the word boy. Okay. So that was the method of the 60s and the 70s. And guess what? Reading skills were not great as we're moving into the 90s and the 2000s. I'm giving you a little bit of a 3,000-year history of phonics here. My apologies, but I'm going to get to where we are today. Yes, so we have about 6 million adults today who are functioning illiterate, who just rely on a bank of sight words. Okay, they can't decode unknown words. They simply rely on what they have stored in their visual bank. And that's the product of that 60s and the 70s. And it really holds you back. If you are using sight word reading alone, you can't read a map because a map contains place names. You can't become a doctor or a nurse because you need to be able to read medicines you've never seen before, or call out a patient's surname in the waiting room. Yeah, something had to change. We get to the 90s and the early 2000s, and this is when I sort of come into the story because this is when I was learning to read. I was taught using first letter cues. This was a 90s method where it's still sort of that 60s and 70s sight words, but now we look at the beginning sound of a word. D for dog, for frog. Okay, so we're looking at the beginning sounds. What teachers are noticing is actually children are putting those sounds all through the word. So not just at the beginning, but every single sound in that word. We move into the 2000s, we get various studies and evidence that proves that this new way of teaching children how to read using phonics, yeah, we should definitely be doing that. So yeah, it was in the mid-2000s, sort of 2007, 2008, when we went back to teaching synthetic phonics. And you ask exactly what is phonics. So you'll hear the term systematic, synthetic phonics. Systematic simply just means we move through it in order. So when your children are at school, we start at the beginning, we go through to the end. The reason for that is that whilst we've got 46 phonemes, so the sounds that you hear and the sounds that you speak, we've got 46 of those in English. We've got about 250 different ways of writing those. Okay, so there's a lot of those alternative spellings. So that's the systematic nature. We can't just teach them all when they're 3. We have to sort of drag it out until they're sort of 8, 9 sometimes or beyond. The synthetic parts, that simply means we synthesize the sounds together. We tend to talk about blending the sounds with children. So you blend the sounds on if they're reading from left to right, or you blend them orally, d or g, dog. So that's the systematic, you teach it in order. Synthetic means that you're blending the sounds together. And then phonics, as we've simply told you, that's the 3,000-year way old that we teach children how to read and write.
Well, that was truly a masterclass.
We got there. So I do a fair amount of training in schools, and I think about the training that I used to have in phonics when I started teaching. And it was very much, this is how you teach phonics. But no one ever said, why? Why am I doing this? Right? So what I try to do with when I meet with parents and when I meet with teachers is to sort of put it into context. What you are doing in your classroom, with your children or at home, in bed at night or at the kitchen table, there's a reason to it. And we talk about evidence-based practice. We choose to teach children in the best possible way that the evidence shows us. And that can sometimes change and that can adapt. And teachers, if you've been teaching for 10, 15, 20 years, or parents, if you've got children who are older and have gone through a different process, or if you've moved from a different country and you've come here to the UK, we're obliged to teach using phonics. We do all have to get up to speed a little bit. So
absolutely.
There we go. That's my roundabout way.
I love it. So now we know what phonics are. Yeah, as you were saying, it is obviously with the reading framework from the Department of Education, which was published a few years ago. It obviously has the phonics systematic synthetic program at the heart of how we teach children to read. So that's one thing that I love of Anima Phonics, that is something that is going to be replicated in all the different schools. So when our children transition to the next schools and they have a really strong foundation. And actually one of the questions we had in the chat was why Anima Phonics? So I try to explain from my perspective that what I love is to use different skills so children can have access to that. And I was saying some of the skills, for instance, we know that when you combine music, when you combine repetition, when you combine movement with the actions, all those sort of skills actually are making the brain connect different knowledge, connect different skills, and obviously through repetition you can master, and eventually, you know, you have that light bulb moment when you can start decoding, blending, putting things together. But is there any other reasons why you decided to design your program in that way, that you have all the songs, all the action? Is anything else there on the theory level?
Well, I guess, yeah, when I started teaching, I did teach with different programs in different schools. I've seen what things I think work best from some other programs. I've definitely been inspired. I think I love the fact that we've built actions into our program to have children moving. I mean, it probably comes because I'm an early years teacher, okay? Having children up and moving around rather than just simply starting with a pencil from day one, right? Exactly. I think that we've tried to bringing in the songs as well. My partner's an illustrator. He's sort of spent the last 15 years now drawing all of our Anima Phonics characters. So yeah, you're right. We have tried to chuck sort of as much at it as possible, and yeah, trying to form we talk about strong bonds between the grapheme and the phoneme. Okay, what we're trying to do right down with the very younger ones is make sure that they are linking that grapheme that they see on the page, so the letter, to the phoneme, to the sound. But I guess the other reason is that you'll have heard that not every child learns in the same way. Right? We talk about that a lot, and yeah, it's true. And whilst I would hope that every single child we ever play our songs to is going to go, yes, I love the Anima Phonics music, it's a fact that some children aren't going to latch onto the songs as well. They're actually going to latch onto our visuals and the characters, the animals. Some children might not be as buzzed or excited about animals. They actually like the rhymes and memorizing the rhymes to help them with the letter formation. So yeah, we've tried to put in as many different things, as many different styles of learning into one sort of single package. So there's something there for everyone. But I think ultimately the thing that inspired me is I did my research. I did look at some of the other schemes that were out there. And I sort of thought they looked, if I asked my grandma to design a phonics program, some of them might come out looking like that. And I looked up on the wall of my classroom and I thought, it's not quite competing with, you know, the cartoons on Netflix or Cartoon Network, right? So I wanted something that was more visually exciting and vibrant. And also silly, right? There's a lot of silliness in Anima Phonics. There are poo and wee jokes, right? It's my phonics program. I can put into it what I like, right? And I still laugh at a fart, and I think 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds do as well. So if you've got them laughing, if you've got them giggling, if they're bringing things home to read with mum and dad and they're laughing at the kitchen table, I think you've already won half of the battle. And that's what we've tried to do with our program. So yeah, you asked why Anima Phonics. I guess that hopefully you can see, and you can see it in your children if they are singing the songs, or if they are going g g g g g, or if they are digging like dog, right? All of that stuff I think is so wonderful for me to go in and see it happening in your classrooms. So yeah, that's why Anima Phonics, and I think why we stand out to some of the competitors.
Yeah. From what you just said, I picked two little things that I think will be really good to discuss. One is what you just said, as we know, children develop at their own pace. I think that's so important for all of us to remember. Childhood and indeed reading should not be a race, and our children will have their own pace. And if you think about even languages, think about children who are learning different languages because of their household, for instance. They might be speaking different languages. Some of them go through a silent stage, right, when the brain is just absorbing everything, and then they feel ready eventually to start speaking. So yeah, I love that you talk about that, because I think obviously, you know, when you start hearing about starting reception, school readiness, also all the myths around the 4+ assessments, and, you know, everyone always wonders, you know, does my child need to know how to read, and by what age? And sometimes I think there is so much pressure on parents as well, because they feel like maybe their children should be reading, all of them, by the age of 3 or 4. So I would like maybe to try and unpick these and try to maybe understand, you know, what being ready for reading means, especially developmentally, and how, as parents, educators, how do we actually know when children are ready, what that looks like?
I mean, I love that you mentioned the silent stage. I think this is when parents panic the most, right?
Yeah. And nothing's happening.
Yeah, particularly if you're then if your child is around some other children, and some children who are out of that stage, that's when you really start to panic. You know, my child's friend is starting to go da, 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 or starting to sort of ask things, and my child is just sort of sitting and watching. Well, actually, the sitting and watching is really important, and so don't panic, don't think something's gone wrong. Just listening to language. And I think the most important thing that I think parents can do is just talk a lot. Narrate what you are doing. Narrate your day. When you are cooking, talk about what you're doing. When you open the fridge, I'm opening the fridge and taking out the milk to put in my coffee. You know, just lots and lots of language. So yeah, and in terms of like getting children ready for reading, there's a lot of stuff that happens before that. We talk about the 7 aspects of learning, particularly with sort of 3-year-olds and maybe 4-year-olds. And what reading starts off as is environmental sounds, listening into sounds, tuning into sounds. We take children on traffic walks. Close your eyes, listen for the cars. Right? How many cars can you hear go past with your eyes closed? That's the beginning of reading, right? It doesn't quite seem like it. We then give children tambourines, and they're sort of tapping and they're making sounds. They are doing body percussion. They're clapping syllables in their names. They are banging on their chest. This is still the beginnings of reading, because all of these skills, this phonological awareness, this phonemic awareness, where we're listening for sounds, we're discerning between different sounds. We then start to listen for rhythm and rhyme in music, maybe a little bit of alliteration with names. This is how we sort of build up slowly. And I know I've been into your schools, right? This is what you guys are doing all the time. I know it's happening. But it's just sort of I just want to explain to parents that there's a step-by-step process that we sort of take children through. We give them all the skills that they need. And then we gradually start to introduce the sounds. And it's all oral. At the beginning, it's oral. And you guys can do this at home. Like I said, oral blending. You're just simply segmenting every sound. Segmenting is the opposite of blending. Okay, blending is putting a word together. Segmenting is taking it apart. So you have a word, like cat, and you want to write the word cat, you segment it into its components. Cat. So all of that sort of getting children ready, you know, by waving a tambourine around, that's the start of getting children to learn how to read. And yeah, that sort of comes down to the don't panic. I'm sure that if you can just be as chatty as possible at home, that's the one biggest step that I think you can do to support your children.
I love that you picked language, because absolutely a language-rich environment is one of the most important things. Just having children being exposed to very rich vocabulary, but also the listening. And I think sometimes we don't realize how important and how difficult a skill is to be able to discriminate, to discern sounds, also to be able to pay attention, just having that spotlight and focusing on the speaker of what someone else is saying, trying to even understand, because that's something that also the reading framework says, that you have language comprehension, and that's obviously something that is going to develop even much later. So it's actually really difficult when you're thinking about reading. You're thinking about children being able to listen to what's happening, being able to take in the information, trying to put all those sounds together, understanding what the meaning is, the context is so much that they have to unpick to be able to actually, read and understand a text. So much.
Yeah, there's a lot that's going on. It's not an easy task, right? To get a child from being sort of 2 years old to 8 years old and a fluent reader, that's not very long. But how much must we have to convey to them to get them to that point? How much support must we give them? And that, again, comes down to why we break it down into those teeny tiny chunks, the nature of it being systematic. And yeah, what we're doing right at the beginning is just, it's all oral. Listen to me, listen to the sounds I'm making. I think something else parents can do, I think that I'm quite often asked, what books should I buy? My child isn't reading, they don't seem very interested in books. Well, what books are you buying for them? Because are they that interested in Mini Beasts or whatever book series you've bought off Amazon? Actually, what are their interests? Is your child actually more interested in Real Madrid? If so, there's loads of books on Real Madrid, right? I'm pretty sure that any interest a 3-year-old child has, there's bound to be some books on it, or a magazine series or something like that. So that's how I think you can develop a love of reading. And when we ask for children to read, we think about books being used for 2 different purposes. Books that they're reading with you, you're reading to them, you're sat with that book about Real Madrid or about unicorns or whatever interest they might have. You are reading that together. You are reading it, they are listening. You might be dragging your finger along the page to show how you read. That's conveying sort of the purpose of reading, okay? The other side of it is books that children are reading independently and on their own. And that's when we always talk about decodable texts. Everything in that book should only contain the graphemes, so the phonics that they've been learning so far up to that point. So they're never having to guess, they're never having to sort of look at the pictures to try and help them out. They're just using the phonics that they're learning. So yeah, we split reading and books into sort of 2 separate packages. The books that they're reading independently on their own have to be decodable. But then there's a whole wide world of other books. Any other book that they could possibly be interested in, that's what I think you can then support at home. That's what your library at home should be stocked with. But yeah, books that they're interested in. Think, what topics are your children interested in, right? Think right now, actually, what do they talk a lot about? What do they always seem to be interested in when it comes up on TV or when we're in, the W.H. Smith and they're looking at the magazines? Think about their interests.
Exactly. We don't want reading to become a task, a homework, something boring, right? We want to instill that love of reading because that's going to be for a lifetime. And I think often as well, we forget that it's everyone's responsibility to get children excited and to love reading. And I think you're right. We need to make children to have more agency and to have more voice when it comes to choose their books. And I think it's because sometimes maybe, the schools might send a list of reading books and then parents might be worried of, maybe trying something different. But I think, as you say, especially at nighttime, I was watching a video by Professor Sam was in this reading rights campaign, and it's just fascinating because he has parents and children reading together and he's scanning the brains, and you can see how they're completely sync. The brains are literally lighting up in synchrony, and it's just beautiful to see the connection that is happening, how all the language areas are completely light up. So yeah, again, it's just so important because when you are little and you're reading with your parents, then that brings that sense of connection, of calmness, emotional regulation, and it's something that you treasure. And it's, and if you are always so used to read, you want to continue to read, even if it's independently. And also, if you're reading things that are close to you that you're interested, of course, you want to read as well. just looking at the chat as well, because we have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with one that is more linked to books, and is what decodable books would you recommend? And I guess this depends on the age, but I guess for the younger children, what type of books would you recommend? I know you have your own series of books, which I love.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the first place to start. So Anima Phonics have published about 150 different decodable books. They start with just 4 words in a book, so they're quite simple. This is our read and see scheme. So that's probably the first place to start. And then it sort of gradually building from single words into short sentences and beyond. Yeah, it's on our website, animaphonics.com. You just click on shop and you can browse all of those. So yeah, should I mention some of our competitors? I don't mind. So I'm a big fan of Oxford Reading Tree. Oxford Reading Tree have been going a long time. I think what I would just ask you is just to think carefully about decodable texts, where your children are. So Oxford Reading Tree and various other phonics programs all sort of categorize and order their books in a different way. There's 40 different phonics programs and phonics publishers. We all do it in a very slightly different order. So if you are browsing other books, just think, well, is this teaching it in the same way that my child is learning? If so, then great, go for it. But yeah, I mean, ask your child's teacher. I think that's probably the best place to start, because they're going to know exactly where your child is, what sounds they're confident in, and then can recommend some decodable books that suit that child. If a book is labeled decodable book, that doesn't mean anything, because it's decodable based on where your child is at, right? So, you can get a decodable book for a 7-year-old, right? Clearly, your children are probably not ready for that book. It's still a decodable book, but it's decodable for a child in year 2, right? So just think very carefully about where you're buying your books and are they best suited to your child. If it's too complex, or if you've ordered it and it's come to your house and you think, well, actually, my child doesn't know all those sounds in that book, then that becomes one of those books I was talking about that you are reading to them. You are modeling, you are showing them how you would read, how you would sound out, how you track along the word with your finger. So yeah, number 1, buy our books. That would make me very happy. But 2, there are loads of lovely other books out there as well.
Yeah, I think you're right with the level you're pitching at, because when we think about how humans learn, you always need a little degree of challenge, that's going to push you. But if it's too challenging, then some children might easily give up before they haven't even had a go. So you want to just find that right amount of challenge, and then if it's within their level, then repeating and repeating, that's going to make them feel so confident, and then they will want to keep trying. So yeah, and also I guess as well, having a nice sort of like balance with fiction and non-fiction as well, just in terms of vocabulary. It's always nice to have that balance. But yeah, and then we have another question that it says as well, where do you think a child should then be in terms of reading at the age of 4? And I guess 4, by the way, is a very interesting age, because you can be 4 and be at nursery. You can be 4 and already be reception. So actually 4 here, this is a very tricky question.
Yeah, my first thought was, which 4-year-old do you mean?
It can be a whole different child what we're talking here about. So maybe we can mention both, right? We can talk about that child who is more raised in 4, or even if they are 4, they're still more on that sort of like nursery pathway. And then maybe we can talk about a child that maybe is a bit more confident and maybe is already at reception, and is a different type.
Yeah, so then, I mean, think about my background as a reception teacher. I guess the way to think about it is, what type of child am I really happy to receive in September? So they've just finished nursery, they come to me day 1, what am I most happy with? I'm not necessarily looking for them to be able to blend and read, okay? What I really want them to be is engaged with the sounds. They can make the sounds, they can hear the sounds. If I say a word, they can tell me what sound is at the beginning of that word. And they might be able to put some of the sounds together. They might be able to orally blend those sounds. All of these sort of skills, the skills I was talking about earlier, those phonological awareness skills, children aware of the sounds that they can hear, the speech sounds, the blending, all of that. if they've had a really solid basis in nursery of linking the grapheme to the phoneme, if I hold up a letter, they can tell me what sound it makes, all those sorts of things, then when we start in reception, I am so happy, because then I can start with the blending, the reading, the segmenting, the getting it down onto paper, all of that sort of stuff, because by the time they finish reception, we're expecting them to be able to read sentences and paragraphs and even write paragraphs. Okay, this is just 1 year later. So if they've got a really solid basis of understanding graphemes and phonemes, the sound and the letter, they can hear the sounds, they can take words apart and put them back together. All of that stuff I really hope is going on in nursery, makes reception teachers really happy.
Oh, that was a great answer. And I have to say, usually when we see parents who are already in reception or even year one, the feedback that we get is, wow, they just flew in reception. And they said it took really very little time on them really being engaged, really ready to read. And I always think, oh yeah, of course, because they had an incredible foundation in nursery that, by the time they started reception, they were so ready, as you were saying, to be aware of all the different sounds, and, everything just clicked together eventually. So yeah,
I think what's really lovely about where you are, because Anima Phonics is not just nationwide, it's international. We've got schools around the world, but because we started in London, and particularly because we started in the independent school sector around you, that's where I worked. I taught at Eaton Square, I taught at Wetherby, so I sort of know and have spread Anima Phonics all around the schools nearby you. I think a lot of your children, when they are moving on to big school, chances are they're going to a school that's using Anima Phonics as well. So hopefully that's a nice and easy transition for the majority of children.
My own children attended our schools and they had that journey, and it was so useful for them because it was just such a smooth transition, being able to use the same scheme. We have lots of questions here as well. It is beneficial to get them to read books which they know of by heart, or is best for them to discover new books that they read? I love this question. She's really good.
I think
it's sort of like going back, it's sort of like the why children love just reading or even watching something again and again and again.
Yeah, no, there's benefits in both, right? So with our book series, we encourage children to sort of keep that book for a little bit. Don't just read it once and then put it back in the box. Sort of sit and work with it over the course of the week. What we don't want to do is keep on always moving the goalposts, right? So here you go, here's a book, day one, read that through. Day two, you're getting a different book. Day three, a different book, okay? And each time you're reading, it's, that's a bit of a challenge. It is a really lovely feeling. In fact, you have read that book a couple of times. Now you can read it quite fluently, okay? By the end of the week, you've had it Monday to Friday. That book is becoming easier. The phonics that you're learning at school, hang on, it's working. Yeah, I'm enjoying this. So we do like children to get familiar with texts. But then we also have to be a little bit careful. Okay, some books that you'll come across have fairly repetitive text, page after page after page, where it sort of changes one or two words. That can look to a teacher or a parent like your child is suddenly fluent and is reading the book. But children are smart. They spot patterns in text. They notice that actually just one or two words is changing. By the time they get to page 4 or 5, they've spotted the pattern. Actually, they can see that the picture tells them what that word is that's changing. They're not even looking at the words. By the time they get to page 6 or page 7 in this repetitive text, and they're just using the pictures, okay? And that's not something we want children to get to. So if they are guessing based on context or based on pictures, actually that's a lot of the methods that were taught in the 60s and the 70s, and we've sort of seen where that ends up with. So we want to get the perfect balance between children getting confident and comfortable with a text, but then giving them a new one so that they're sort of then still having to use their phonic knowledge. So yeah, the answer is both. If maybe it's not the best answer, but if you can sort of...
That's such a great point. It's such a great point what you said about what happens when you sort of like memorize something by heart, right? Because we sometimes get young children who have this book, and again, they've read it so many times that, as you said, there are a few things that they sort of like just already guess, they already memorize, so they are not actually reading. And it's so interesting because, it may appear that they're fluent or they're ready to read, but then when exposed to something a little bit more challenging, then all of a sudden, their confidence really diminishes because they feel they're not as good as they thought. And obviously everyone is saying, no, they're amazing, they can read this, and then present it with something else. It might obviously, diminish their confidence. I think that's a really good point. And I guess that's why it's important as well that parents, as well read with children, so they can also spot, you can sort of like tell if your child is actually decoding or reading, putting things together, understanding what's happening, and then you can ask questions as you're reading, or just, pointing at something and saying, what do you think is happening here? That's why I think it's so important to read with children.
Yeah, fully agree.
But yes, I think there is no more questions here. So going back to our conversation. We've been talking about so many things, but also and what happens before phonics, which I think is also really important. But then we've been talking a lot about the early years. But then if we move a little bit further along the way, what happens when, all of a sudden a parent might feel that, that child is not where they should be, especially, year one, all of a sudden you have all the spelling tests, and I know that creates a lot of anxiety. And I know lots of families, all of a sudden they have to practice and repeat things. So, they're ready for that Friday spelling test at school. And so what happens to those children who all of a sudden it seems like they're falling behind, and then all of a sudden, because obviously maybe they're not doing that well at the test, all of a sudden they're not interested. So, how you re-engage those children, how do you support the older children to sort of like love reading and keep on trying?
Yeah, so with Anima Phonics, we have an intervention scheme, which we hope and we plan that most children will never need to see, right? That's the idea. But of course, we mentioned earlier, every child moves at their own pace. And so what we do is that we plan to give extra support for children as and when they need it. And it might only be sort of for 4 or 5 weeks. And that extra support we give to them, it's just a little bit more physical. Okay, it's a lot more game based. It's either sort of 1-to-1 or sort of very small groups. And also some children just find learning in a class of 20 to 30 children, right, is not the best way of learning to learn to read. Okay, there's a lot of distractions going on. So we do give them some quieter support. And you will find as your children go through reception, year 1 and year 2, they might get support, extra time at different times with different children. That's not something to worry about. If you are told that your child is doing some intervention activities, once or twice a week, that's not something to panic about. That's something to feel grateful for, okay? Your teachers are on top of things. They are picking up when things are falling behind, and we know exactly what to do with our interventions to then get children back to where they need to be. So your children are some of the lucky ones, right? If they are getting the extra time. And it's not instead of the main phonics lesson. Children are always in the phonics lesson. They're getting some extra time, okay? So this is wonderful. Also, some children just take a lot longer, right? Anima Phonics is a nursery to year 2 program. Some children, and this will be some of your children, need to last up to the end of primary school, up to the end of year 6 being taught phonics, okay? There's a temptation to think, well, phonics isn't really working for my child. Let's try something different. Let's try whole language, memorizing words by sight, dog, fish, cat, okay? And yeah, that's going to look like your child has suddenly become the best reader in their class. For the short term, they're going to soon hit the buffers. It's not possible to memorize words by sight to that degree, okay? There's about 1 million words in the English language. The sort of Stephen Hawkings of the world can sort of memorize 200,000, it's been shown. Most of us get to about halfway, so we cannot rely on sight words. And it's always so tempting to try that with your children, particularly with spelling tests, okay? Look at the word, memorize it, cover it, write it down. Instead, always take words apart, put them back together. I've probably gone off on a tangent now. So you asked a little bit about getting children re-engaged if things are falling behind. Anima Phonics has that all planned for, and so do most phonics programs as well. So even if your child goes to a school where they're not using Anima Phonics, chances are that there is some sort of intervention or some sort of way of supporting children and making sure no child falls through the cracks. What you as parents just need to understand is that some of your children are just going to take longer, and it could be a year longer, it could be 4 years longer, but please stick with it, okay? If you could please stick with decoding, segmenting, taking words apart, putting them back together for a lot longer, you're getting your child geared up for being an independent adult, an independent reader who can do any job that they want. Compare that to the child who's been taught sight words, memorized words, hasn't used phonics. Well, actually, they can't have every job they want, okay? It's going to be a very limited band of opportunities for that child. So stick with it. Don't be upset if your child is one of those children who takes longer. It's fine, okay? It could have been me. I don't know. It could have been you. We don't actually know whether we were that child at school, right? It's possible. Who cares, right? It doesn't matter in the long term. So,
we will get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice the way you phrased it. It is wonderful. And yeah, just having that one-to-one time. Yeah, exactly. It's a plus, it's a benefit. But yeah, thank you so much, Kerry. That was so interesting. I mean, we've gone through the history of phonics. We've gone through work camps before phonics. We've talked about your personal journey, how you created Anima Phonics and why we use it, love of reading. And yeah, and we also even talk about year 1 and year 2 and how we engage children. I think that was really, really helpful.